Welcome to the Sports Pharmacy Network show where we dispense clinical and evidence-based information to optimize health and human performance. I'm Brandon Welch, clinical sports pharmacist and your host of the show. Today, we are thrilled to welcome back Dr. Michael Day to the podcast. How would you define longevity medicine and how does it differ from traditional medicine?
Well, I think there can be different ways of defining it, and so it'll depend on who you ask. And I think the way that I define it, for me, it's not about living to 120 or 200 or these things that we've not seen before on Earth. For me, it's about, as you mentioned, health span, extending our disease-free period of life. And at the core of that is a proactive and preventative approach. And that is, as I was, in my sports medicine practice, I thought we would do a lot of things great in traditional medicine. And it's, the trauma care, acute care, advanced technology, that's where our system really shines. And in my own corner of that world, take, for example, ACL reconstruction. It's great that somebody tears their ACL and we can reconstruct it and get them back to doing the thing they love. And that's great. But then, the next kid tears their ACL and the next kid tears their ACL, and it's the same story. They've got, weak core, weak glutes. They have poor mechanics. They're putting themselves at risk for an injury that sometimes is unavoidable, but many times, a lot of these are non-contact injuries. These are people that have poor biomechanics that could have been prevented with known prevention programs. That's kind of the story of modern medicine. It's like we have great ways to treat the disease, but people are still getting the diseases. They're still getting the cardiovascular disease. And if you have a heart attack, we can, bring you back from death's door and open up your arteries, but those arteries are still getting narrowed. And people are coming into the system and getting treated. But how do we keep people from having to come into the system? And that's where traditional medicine is really disease care. And there's some prevention, but it's just not set up to allow the economics of it or the way that the providers spend their time to be spent on prevention and being proactive and trying to delay the onset of chronic disease. And so that's, for me, how I define longevity medicine, is that it sits a little bit outside or layered on top of the traditional medicine. And we need that because of all the great things that traditional healthcare can do. But I think we can enhance that by being more proactive and preventative. And that's where longevity medicine has its definition for me.
Now, I think that's a phenomenal definition, and how you define it is because one of the things that you nailed on, which I think is so important for people to understand, is that we're not trying to debunk any of the principles of modern or traditional medicine, is because there is good evidence and resources behind that. But essentially, how do we enhance or innovate that approach to help optimize the care of our patients, right? Is because, like you said it, with traditional medicine, there are these time constraints that put barriers with the high level of care that you can deliver to a lot of these patients. And I think the key here is really being proactive and preventative, understanding, okay, what are some of those lifestyle modifications that we need to do to stay ahead of any disease states that we may have. And I always like to say, as I think about longevity medicine and how to be preventative and proactive, it's always important for us to understand what our family history is. So we are also aware of what are those predisposing risk factors that we may have, and how do we tailor a lifestyle approach to help be ahead of that curve so that we don't put ourselves at a greater risk of some of those disease states that may be embedded inside of our family history. And so I like where longevity medicine is going. It's very innovative and proactive, but also a key thing here too, and I'm sure you're aware of this too, Mike, is that um, we need to stay evidence based as much as possible. I know sometimes longevity medicine can go a little bit outside of the guardrails, and we can be too exploratory, which has its drawbacks. But as much evidence that we can pull with some of the clinical decisions that we're making for a lot of our patients, the better we'll be able to help optimize their care.
Yeah, the two things that you hit on there, the family history and the evidence base. The genetics are huge, and we shouldn't deny them. And there's so much that we can do that our genes don't define us, and that's 100%. We should not limit ourselves in terms of achievement or how healthy we can be. But there is the reality of like that's where we're starting with. It's what we do with it is up to us. But if you had parents that died in their 50s or 60s, like that's something you need to be aware of and active against. And if you had people in your family living to 100, that's a vote in your favor. And you see all the time, people living past 100, and they're like, what's your secret? And it's like, oh, I have brandy every morning. And it's like, okay, that's like that's a testament to the power of genetics. A lot of that is genetics. But we want to take both in mind and say, well, this is what I'm dealt, and how can I make the best of that? And when choosing what to do, yeah, I think we should be constantly going back and forth between what is the evidence base, and what is more just evidence informed, and what is more individualized, because our evidence is based on the scientific method, and we test a hypothesis, and we refine it, and we find out. But the nature of that is it will tell us what we can conclude for a large population of people. So we say, if there's 1,000 of you, the quote unquote best thing to do for 1,000 individuals is this. But that may that 1,000 people is going to include 1,000 individuals that it may not be the best thing for that one person. So we've got this constant back and forth and almost tension between like what's the evidence at large, but what's works for the individual. And that is where we get a little outside of it and experimental. And the main thing is, if we are going to go outside of the evidence, is we're going to do it safely. And it's always a constant discussion of risks and benefits. And if there's a wide safety margin and low enough risk, then we can experiment a little bit and see like what works for the individual.
Definitely risk versus benefit here. You have to be able to do that analysis, right? Um, when we have our oath, right? You see this in pharmacy when you graduate pharmacy school, and you see this in medicine when you graduate medical school. The very few words that I remember out of that lengthy oath that we have to say is that it's important for us to use good clinical judgment. And the way we use good clinical judgment is being able to assess safety versus what are the risks. And so if we're going to go outside of those confines, right, it's important to assess risk versus benefit. So literally you nailed it right on the head with that. Now, moving on into like what are some key factors that you would say influence longevity medicine if it had to be five things? So in other words, what are the things we can do to live healthier and longer if it had to be those five things that you had to say?
Okay. Um, well, what we can do refers to our activities, like what the choices that we're making. But I think you can think about this in two ways. You can think about risk, which we touched on a little bit, or we talk about what are the activities that you're doing. And and so I think maybe it helps first of all to think about risk, and this is at its most basic level, what's most likely to kill you. And in the United States, it's cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, neurodegenerative disease, cancer, or accidental injury and falls. So for the older individuals, more of the falls. For younger individuals, um, an accidental death, which you could also put overdose in that, unfortunately. Um, but for someone that's not using, the for me, for example, the most dangerous thing I do, I tell my kids when we're in the car, I'm trying to get them to like quiet down. I'm like, this is the most dangerous thing that we do. We're driving in a car. This is the most likely thing to that's the most likely thing to kill me, statistically speaking, at the age that I'm at. So if we think about those are the five things that I would say from a risk standpoint, and you bring in your family history and your occupational exposure and whatever else active issues that you have, and then you think about, well, what are the five things that are going to affect my longevity? And here I think I would think about sleep, exercise, social connection, purpose in life, and stress and stress management. So, um, you know, sleep is foundational, affects every aspect of our health, and so that's got to be a priority. Probably like neck and neck with that is movement practice and exercise. And I say movement because it's not just about exercise. It's not just that whatever you dedicate to going to the gym, but it's how much are you moving in a non-exercise fashion as like the larger portion of that Venn diagram, um, and what's your movement practice. Social connection, I think we see very strong ties to the strength of social connection being tied to longevity, and then purpose. It's we're talking. What are you doing here? What are you living for? It doesn't. If you live a long time and you're miserable, that's there's no point in that. And so I think finding something, a reason to be healthy is key. And then I think stress really kills us. So it's like it's hard to measure that, like how much stress I'm under, quote unquote. But it's clear that we've got to find ways to manage stress and have the right amount so that we're having good stress that spurs us to achieve and to get our bodies to adapt, but that we're also not overloading it.
How would you define longevity medicine and how does it differ from traditional medicine?
Well, I think there can be different ways of defining it, and so it'll depend on who you ask. And
And I really want to get into the minutia of some of the ones that you mentioned. Right. So when we talk about, for example, sleep as one of the foundational things we can do to help influence longevity medicine, live longer, healthier, and happier. How many hours a night are we talking about? What about the quality of sleep? Is there any sleep hygiene recommendations, wearable devices? What's your thoughts on that?
well, with my patients, who always try and start with the basics, and as some people may come into an interaction thinking like, what supplements do I need to take or medications? And like, that's really the last thing that we talk about. So, and I try not to assume that anyone has good sleep hygiene. But yeah, we talk about amount, regularity, and then like the practices of what you're doing around the bedroom. Amount is individual, so some people need more than others. 7 to 9 hours is kind of the catches most people, um, and important to note that that is 7 to 9 hours of sleep, not necessarily time in bed. So sleep efficiency is, ideally would be around 85-90%. So encourage people to think about that. Sleep trackers can give that number to you, but if you don't need a tracker, if you say I'm spending this much time in bed, figuring I'm getting 85%, then that's going to give me X hours. Um, Same time to go to bed and go to wake up. So regularity is huge for getting your body into that rhythm and giving you that quality of sleep that's going to be repeatable. And then bedroom practices, absence of light, absence of noise, or white noise, um, the right temperature, usually like 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Um, you know, Bed partner is, it actually is like interferes with sleep, but people that are in relationships also often they're sharing a bed. But thinking about what else is there, is there a dog? Are there kids? Kids are gonna, for a period of time probably disrupt your sleep unavoidably. Um, but and then the routine around bedtime. Do you have a wind down routine? Um, are you avoiding alcoholic drinks within 3 hours of bed? Are you avoiding really strenuous exercise within 4 hours of bed? Um, are you doing things to cause your body temperature to drop, whether it's taking a hot shower before bed or even just splashing water on your face and hands can help with that. And then on the morning side, are you getting sunlight exposure in the early morning that's going to tell your circadian rhythm like this is morning, and set you up for sleeping at night? So those are kind of the basics of sleep hygiene. And then once somebody is doing all that, if there's a lot of times there's something that's like glaring, like, oh, you're having like, two alcoholic drinks like after dinner right before bed every night. Like, okay, that's probably destroying your sleep quality. Um, Sometimes there's something that jumps out that like, well, we can immediately like change that. Um,
Hmm.
and and a lot of that is just basic hygiene. And then there's going to be a smaller subset of people that may have a sleep disorder, some sort of insomnia, and then we can progress from there to, okay, is there anything nutritionally or supplement, or medication, or do we even need to investigate further? Do we need to get a sleep study, for example?
Speaking of that, touching on that a little bit, as far as if you've exhausted all those different sleep hygiene tips, and one thing I would add that I think is a distraction to many more of the millennial generation is turn those cell phones off 30 minutes to an
Oh,
hour before you
yeah,
wind
it's a
down.
great point. 100%. Yeah.
I mean, it's like when they shut down TikTok for 24 hours and everybody was going crazy. I mean, you got to know how to detach yourself from social media at some point, have that expiration date at night. So that way you're able to implement some of these sleep hygiene tips to help wind your body down. So that way it can allow those natural releasing hormones inside of our brain, such as melatonin, to be synced at a high level to allow our body to relax and get the appropriate sleep and rest that we need. I've always found it funny when I've had patients that I've consulted with, and they're telling me they're like, Brandon, I'm doing all the sleep hygiene things, and the one thing that's always overlooked is what about that cell phone?
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it,
And
for a lot
the
of people, it's
notion,
hard to detach, right?
yeah, yeah, the notion that it's like, oh, well, it's my alarm clock. It's like, no,
Yes,
like
no.
spend $10 and get like a little plastic alarm clock that you don't need. The phone doesn't need to be next to your head when you're sleeping. I mean, my phone is like on a downstairs on bedrooms upstairs, and it
Keep
goes
it
into
away from you.
yeah, notifications are silent starting at 5 p.m. and
Yeah. Now, for people who've again exhausted all of those different sleep hygiene tips and all of that, what supplements would you say are out there for people to consider that can potentially help them give them that extra boost to go to sleep?
yeah, probably first one that we do is magnesium, because again, wide margin of safety, in terms of is it going to help sleep? I think the evidence is mostly like if you're magnesium deficient, um, correcting that would can help sleep. So it's a little less convincing that magnesium is actually like doing something for a magnesium replete individual to get them sleeping better. But we do use magnesium L3 and 8 just because that crosses blood-brain barrier, that particular formulation, and it's an easy one to just add on, and unlikely to have adverse effects unless they're using like magnesium oxide, may get the bowels moving. But magnesium is one. Don't use melatonin except for jet lag situations. Although perhaps in the elderly, I think there's more evidence that they may have harder time with endogenous melatonin.
Hmm.
So try and keep that to jet lag situations. um, Ashwagandha is one that would sometimes use. Um, Glycine is an amino acid that I've found more success with higher doses of that than is typically recommended by the labeling.
Hmm.
Which, instead of 1 gram, doing like 4 or 5. Um, so again, pretty safe. Just an amino acid supplement. Um, and again, if there's a jet lag situation, maybe phosphatidylserine to kind of signal the body that it's time to sleep. So those are probably the main supplements that we use.
At any point, would you say it's appropriate to maybe combine some of these together? So, for example, the mag L-threonate with the ashwagandha. Do you think that would be pretty appropriate for people to use to help with sleep?
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. I mean, you're the pharmacy expert, but I've found no problem. You could. I mean, I've taken all of the above, like coming back from a jet lag, traveling west to east, and um, trying to reset my clock, and have not felt like drowsy, either like I was being knocked out or drowsy in the morning.
No, I think they work very synergistically together. The popular one, and I'm glad that you touched on it, is the melatonin, which would be best used for jet lag, especially for our busy high level professionals that are constantly traveling across the country for business trips, or even our very competitive athletes, college, professional pros. Melatonin, the phosphatidylserine, those combos together could be great for jet lag. I know I get quite a few questions around what are some good sleep supplements, especially for the jet lag piece. So it's great that you actually touched on that. And typically when I think of like some of these tips that we're talking about to enhance longevity medicine, I usually like to carry over some of the wellness and high performance tips that athletes are using. How do we carry that over into general population, right? And I'm sure you may be familiar with this, Mike, working with a lot of athletes yourself. And the reason why I bring this up is because I always love the story of Roger Federer, world renowned tennis player who had multiple injuries, and people thought that his career was done. And why do I bring this up is because one of the ways that helped him get back to being competitive, and I think that he may have set the record, don't quote me for this, for being one of the oldest tennis players to, win grand titles at his age. And, one of the things that he talked about was the restorative sleep that he was getting in his younger ages when he was competing at a high level in tennis. He was getting a lot of different injuries, knee, lower back was bothering him, and he took a long hiatus off of the game to try to help with his recovery. And a huge part of that was him talking about sleep and the restorative benefits that it provided him. And it's funny because analysts who were thinking that his best days were behind him, they were like, "Man, did this guy find the fountain of youth?" Is because for him to come back after multiple injuries and perform at such a high level. I mean, this guy was winning titles back to back, and it was just very eye opening to see the power and the importance of sleep. Is because you may know this for a while. I mean, people were walking around overworked, underrested, and they were wearing poor sleep as if it's a badge of honor. Like, oh, I don't get no sleep. It's all about the grind. I'll sleep when I'm dead. No, it's not, because you know each day that you're contributing to what I call that that sleep debt, it's detrimental to your body. And it's important for, optimizing our sleep for it to try to be a priority of ours.
Yeah, that's our time to repair and recover. And yeah, I think I heard Federer's routine involved like more than 12 hours per night of sleeping. And yeah, I can't even stay asleep that long, um, but I'm not performing at his level. So um, yeah,
It's like they say, success leaves clues. Look at the greats. LeBron James optimizes sleep. Tom Brady, the TB12 method, he talks about sleep. And so these guys that are performing at a high level for long periods of times, it just tells you a lot about some of the things that they're doing.
yeah, and I think the overall cultural pendulum has swung a little bit away, from the like always grinding, like sleep when I'm dead culture. I think there's more awareness of that now, and it's still easy to fall into that for people that are seeking high achievement. But there's more of an awareness now, which I think is good, that sleep is really, something that's going to help you perform rather than something that to be minimized.
Absolutely. Now, one of the other foundational things that I wanted us to kind of touch on is nutrition, right? And so we hear a lot about the blue zone diet and how it's inspired by eating habits of people living in the five blue zone regions where people have a higher than average life expectancy and, an extraordinary prevalence of the centenarians, right? And so, what are the blue zones and what can we learn from them?
So, five blue zones are Sardinia, the island off the west coast of Italy, Okinawa, Japan, Ikaria, Greece, Loma Linda, California, where there's a lot of Seventh Day Adventists, and the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. And so people routinely living beyond 100 in these populations. And, Dan Butner kind of popularized this. There's a Blue Zones cookbook, and diet is a big focus of that. But uh, it's not the same diet in each of these zones. So these are pretty different cultural populations. So the question is, what is it about their very different diets? There's different climates. There's, what is tying these people together? Is it just a gene pool? I don't think so. There's certain things that we can draw, but the diet is, I would say they're not eating too much. The Okinawans talk about eating till 80% full, and that being enough.
Hmm.
Um, and they're eating a lot of plant based. They're only the Seventh Day Adventists are vegetarian, but the other groups are not what you would call vegan or vegetarian. Um, but meat has like a limited role in terms of the proportions of the diet, and that for some of those cultures it may be, it's an expensive thing, and so it may be like a key, but relegated to a smaller proportion than what's typically done in America. And so it's a lot of whole foods, whole grains. They're it's close to home, so it's they're farming communities or surrounding agriculture. That's where their food is coming from. They have limited access to processed food, or fast food, or these edible food like substances that are getting into a lot of the standard American diets. That's kind of by default culturally not incorporated or available. Their physical activity is high, and there may be they live in walkable cities. They're not driving a lot. They're either walking or using public transportation. So they're probably not doing like a lot of intense exercise or athletics, but they're very active in terms of just moving throughout the day and throughout their lives. Um, we mentioned social connection before, and that's a common thread in these communities, that there's often multi-generational living in the same household. They're maintaining these intergenerational ties, and that is something that's fostering longevity in the people that are on the upper part of that, three generation household, sometimes four. Um, and then the other two things I think are, you know, the stress level is low, and their life is relatively simple, and those kind of go hand in hand. So, um, there's they're not on the grind. They're not sleep when I'm dead.
Yeah,
They're the pace of the life is such that it's not creating a lot of stress or complexity, and so those are lessons we can draw from that. We're not, you know getting our food from that same soil, or we can't pick our parents and grandparents, to be centenarians, but we can take some lessons from, like, you know whole food, plant-centered diet. Choose whatever, dietary framework you want, but eating real foods, and being wary of the amount of processing, and being physically active, and maintaining those social connections, especially with our family.
I think for us, one of the things that I definitely draw. Well, let me take a step back. Um, for the people that are in those blue zone diets, one of the things that I really draw from them is the ability, one, to have self discipline, and then two, the level of simplicity that they have with life. Um, they not only have a routine or disciplined way of doing things, but they found a way to simplify it. I feel like here, in more modern society, we've complicated things, in order to, for lack of a better word, define what longevity potentially can be, right? And you just mentioned it, right? It's just something as simple as, eating more whole foods, fruits, vegetables, making sure you're getting in enough fiber from some of those whole foods, plant-based foods. These are key essentials, right? I mean, the evidence is just outstanding when it comes to the hallmark benefits. Something as simple as fiber can produce, to help us live longer and to reduce the amount of chronic diseases that we have. I mean, if you even look at the stats, the average American does not even get close to the recommended amount of 20 to 40 grams of fiber a day, and us consuming a lot of those ultra processed foods. And it doesn't help that we live in an uber based society, right? Where, there's a lot of convenience, right, to the way that we tend to shop for our food and how we consume it. And not to mention, the people that are on the road that are constantly driving and eating or drinking coffee at the same time. Like, that's just an added distraction, right? And it
Yeah.
just feeds into the point of what we're talking about, is trying to create some level of simplicity if we can. Um, and so I really draw a lot of things from the blue zone diet as well, especially the point of the simplicity, and then more plant-based foods that we can consume in our diet. Just spend more time in the kitchen, if we can. And believe it or not, spending more time in the kitchen, cooking with maybe your spouse, and having those family dinners instead of being isolated while you're eating, I think it can make all the difference, in the world. And then, one of the things I tell people too when it comes to healthy eating is that our mind plays tricks on us. And what do I mean by that? Is that our mind is attracted to what it is exposed to the most. And so, for example, if you don't set up your kitchen into an environment where you expose your mind or your eyes to healthy foods. And so, for example, if I open my refrigerator and I have nothing but juice on my top shelf, I don't have any vegetables on my second shelf, and it becomes inconvenient for me to eat healthy, 9 out of 10, I'm not going to do it. Right. But if I set up a healthy environment of, you know, uh, rich vegetables, fruits, have water at my top shelf, good healthy snacks, almonds, chia seeds to put in my salads, the chances of me eating healthy are going to be high, is because time is of essence for us in today's society, right? And so we're going to very little inconvenience ourselves to go get that cherry pop or that ice cream from the store down the street if it's not in front of us, right? And so setting up that nice food perimeter inside of your kitchen is going to be key to help live a more healthier diet rich life.
Yeah, you put the salad in the bottom drawer. You gotta, even if you can't see it,
Can't
you're
see
not
it.
gonna eat it. Yeah,
No. So you just have to just be very mindful and conscious of the things that you're doing.